Thanks very much, Dan. So first of all, I've got a couple of questions for you guys. Now, I was going to ask you to raise your hands, but given that these lights are pretty bright, I'm going to ask you to get a bit more active. So first of all, can you stand up if you are working as a tech lead or in a technical leadership capacity just now?
Wow.
Whoa, okay.
Awesome.
Okay, if you've ever worked as a tech lead, even if you're not doing that role just now.
Sorry?
If you've ever worked as a tech lead, even if you're not doing it right now. How about if you would like to be a tech lead? Sorry, there's a lot of people here. keep standing, everybody.
We'll get to that pattern.
So that's if you'd like to be a tech lead, but everybody can keep standing who was up before. Okay, so a lot of the population here. So what we're going to talk about today shouldn't be too unfamiliar to most of you. We're going to talk about, and we're going to name some of the patterns and antipatterns.
You can take a seat again as well.
Thanks, Pat. We rehearsed that bit. Some of the patterns and antipatterns in technical leadership. So first of all, I'd just like to, introduce myself. So my name's Laura Paterson, and I've been delivering software for about 15 years now. In this time, I've always been fascinated by the impact that technical leadership can have on the team and on the code and on the architecture that comes about. And since I first started as a Java developer about 15 years ago, actually there's a chance that my very first ever tech lead might be somewhere in the audience, but I won't ask him to do a call out just in case. And I promise none of these anti-patterns are about you. Okay, anyway, so since I started as a Java dev, I have worked as a tech lead in various industries, various technologies, and some of the lessons that I've learned in that time that I'm looking forward to sharing with you today.
And my name is Patrick Kwa, and I guess what's kind of interesting maybe for some of you is I've also recently sort of published a book, which Laura is actually inside. And it's a collection of stories about technical leaders. And one of the interesting things is when you go on this journey from being a developer to a tech lead, there's nobody really there that's generally helping you on your way. You're sort of going from this world of writing code and dealing with computers to suddenly having to deal with people, and you're forced into this position of dealing with people, and you're not necessarily ready. So what's interesting about this are some of the lessons that we've learned in sort of the stories that we've sort of taught through. And we're going to share some of those things in our sort of talk today.
Okay, so today we're going to tell you a story. We're going to tell you a story that probably won't seem that uncommon to many of you. We're going to tell you a story about a developer, a good developer who's been known for doing things right. So we'd like to, we've already introduced you. We'd like to introduce you to Hayden, who's going to be our first-time tech lead.
So Hayden works for a company called Copper and Pin. It's nice and hipster. It's about a new media content company, and he's been working there for the last sort of 3 years. And like any sort of technical person, he started his life working as a developer, and he started on sort of the public website side of Copper and Pin. It's a growing organization, and so it's sort of getting bigger and bigger, and it's if you can imagine how media and sort of something like Quartz or something is growing bigger and bigger, they've had to split some of this, and he's moved away from the sort of public website team to deal with sort of content APIs. So as the organization is moving towards mobile and tablet, as you probably might sort of relate to in your sort of organizations, he's sort of moved to this sort of back-end team where he's supporting a lot of the different content.
Okay, so he's been doing a good job. He's been in a position for a while, and all of a sudden, ta-da, you're a tech lead. Okay, right side. Okay, so the question is, well, actually, before the question, let's introduce you to the team that Hayden is going to be heading up. Fairly typical back-end structure of a team here. We've got a business analyst who acts as the conduit between business and the team. Also responsible for reporting, tracking progress, that kind of thing. We've got a QA who pairs with the devs on automated testing. We've got a grad who only joined a couple of months ago, so fairly new to the team. We've also got a senior dev, probably about the same sort of seniority as Hayden, but he only joined the team about 6 months ago. And we also have another 2 developers that have been on the team for a couple of years. Okay, and now, what's the tech lead actually do? Well, this is what we're going to find out now. So for the first few weeks, nothing much changed. The they continued on mostly as they were, so making enhancements to the APIs, building out some infrastructure for their monitoring system, fixing production issues. And then all of a sudden, they got tapped on the shoulder. There'd been a big product management meeting, and they wanted to have a chat with the BA and Hayden. Okay, so one of the key revenue generators for Copper and Pin is getting premium account signups. And the product managers had done some user testing and realized that if they added a social media element to their offering, they'd be able to increase the signups by 20%. However, this was going to require 2 new APIs for the Content API team to create, and they wanted to launch it to coincide with Fashion Week, which was only 2 months away. So, finally, something for Hayden to get his teeth into. Quite exciting. Okay, so Hayden's got lots of ideas. He's absolutely brimming with them. He's got some new things that he wants to try with how to design APIs. He's got a couple of new libraries he's looking to check out. So he goes into his daily tech huddle and he speaks to the team. He's like, hey guys, I've got these ideas. What do you think? And they've got a couple of questions and a couple of concerns. But to be honest, he's kind of going, we've only got 2 months. We're just going to go with this. This is my decision. So now that he's kind of told the team what they're going to be doing, it's like, right, we better get started onto coding. But he's not quite convinced that the team really get all of his new ideas fully. So he decides, well, this work, I know what I'm doing with it, I better take it onto myself. So he picks up more and more work, he codes away, he doesn't let the team in. They're kind of stuck doing the plumbing code. Yeah, as hours get longer and longer.
So they managed to actually deliver this API, but Hayden is sort of feeling burnt out. He's been working really hard. As the lead, he's felt really responsible about taking care of the solution and investing himself in this. And they sort of take a break point, and he's in this sort of tea room, making himself a cup of tea. And in this sort of tea room, he comes into touch with a sort of old colleague of his called Bobby. Now, Bobby is actually a seasoned sort of technical person in the organization. So where sort of Hayden sits in the sort of the Content API team, Bobby is actually sitting within the Architecture Guild team, and she's overseeing quite a number of different sort of products. And what sort of her background is that she worked with Hayden when he was working on the public front-end website, but she's been with Copper and Pin for a lot longer, so she's been leading sort of the solution architecture for a very long time. And she has some things to say in terms of giving some wisdom to Hayden. So they sit down and they sort of talk through some of the different things because they worked together and they have a really good relationship and they have very similar interests in sort of API design. And she wants to see Hayden get a lot better. Now, if you've been in a situation like this, it's really nice to actually talk to somebody who's been through some of this before. And it's very rare you get this kind of opportunity. So Bobby asked Hayden, can we have a bit of a chat? And there's some things that she's noticed about the way that he's been leading his team that she'd like to give back to him. So he's not quite sure where this is going to lead to. Ooh, feedback. But we're going to try it anyway. So she starts talking through some of the things that she was actually going to talk through. And she talks through the things, you've been working really long hours. I know that you're a really dedicated person who wants to solve the right technical solution. And the way that you seem to be doing this is by collecting all the sort of decision points and deciding to make the solutions yourself. And this is kind of one of the things that as a tech lead, you're kind of feeling maybe this is the right thing to do because you've been given this position of authority and you want to sort of take care of that. There was a discussion in the team that she overheard, and there was an argument where one of the developers wanted to have a particular JSON structure in their taxonomy structure. And one of the things that Hayden wanted to do was actually override that and say, well, this is the way that we're actually going to do things. And she was kind of talking about how this transition is really hard, and it seems like you're taking all of this work. So the question she sort of asks him is, what are your developers thinking and feeling? So you yourself have your own sort of ideas, but what is it that your team, that you're there to lead, how are they actually feeling?
So let's go back and look and see what's happened to our team of happy smiley faces that we started with just a few slides back. So you can see up in our top corner here, we've got our senior dev. Now, he was the one that was proposing the JSON structure, and he was kind of shot down on it. And he was also a bit annoyed about the fact that he hadn't been listened to when he'd raised some of his initial concerns. So he's a bit demoralized, and he's basically spending half of his time on Hacker News. We've got the dev and the QA over here. The QA's actually gone ahead and implemented a BDD framework that this dev's not happy about, and they've been having a bit of an argument about it. So the QA guy's quite happy, however the dev, not so much. We've got the grad, who's obviously quite junior, and one of the more junior devs down the bottom. Don't know if you can quite get the thing here, but they've been doing quite a lot of gold plating. In fact, they've been working on some of the plumbing code. They've not been able to push it through to completion because they've been doing all this additional gold plating, whereas actually they should have just refactored it in the first place. So that's what the team's looking like just now. Not quite so happy. So let's step out of the narrative for a second and let's look at some of the labels, some of the anti-patterns that we've pulled out from Hayden's behaviour. The mole. So this is the one that's characterised by the head-down coding that we saw when Hayden first got in. It's focusing on your own contribution rather than focus on the team's contribution, and the idea that you just have to keep on delivering in the same way that you did before you were made tech lead. And the lack of realisation that your team's delivery is the thing that becomes important rather than your own contribution once you're into that position. You become so engrossed in your own delivery that you actually fail to see the big picture, and you fail to put your head up at the sand to see how the rest of the team are doing. And in the meantime, the team are working without leadership, so things like tensions can go unnoticed and get more damaging. You might miss opportunities for innovation, for refactoring, for improvement, and you might also find corners being cut on quality. The dictator. So this was when he lays down the law. No, I appreciate you got concerns, but this is the way we're going to be doing it. Or actually, probably not even appreciating. This is just the way you're going to be doing it. So the dictator wants to make all the decisions for themselves and is either going to not listen, not ask, or just completely override anything that's said that's in opposition to him. The team becomes very demotivated as they feel that they don't have any hand in shaping the solution or shaping the code base. Well, alongside this, whilst as a tech lead it's tempting, especially as a new tech lead, it's tempting to want to make all the decisions yourself. By not evolving the team, you actually, as well as damaging the morale, you're actually missing out on the opportunity to add the ideas and the knowledge from the rest of your team into the code base. The final one I'm going to talk about in this section is the hero. Now, I think this is a fairly common anti-pattern. I've seen it in quite a number of different places, and it can manifest itself in a few different ways. So you either have the hero who wants to do all of the interesting or maybe the high-profile work themselves. It could be the person who is working all the hours and picking up every single production issue. It could be the person who has all the knowledge of all the key areas, so they become the person that people have to go to. They also will struggle to delegate. It's a common symptom of this pattern. So again, kind of similar to the mole, whilst you might get some personal satisfaction out of enacting some of these behaviours, it does come at the damage to the team who become bored and become demoralised. You also have risk of burnout, like Pat mentioned, and you, as I said before, you become the single point of failure in case something goes wrong in that area. Okay.
So let's go back to Copper and Pin. So Hayden's done his sort of first term. They've delivered the API, but the question is at what cost? And he's reflecting on some of the things that Bobby mentioned to him, and he's thinking about what are the things that I might do differently in my role as being a tech lead. And he's thinking, well, I should definitely commit to actually doing something differently. So he's going to try a few things, which means he's going to try to avoid the mole and being a dictator and being the hero and taking all of that.
Okay, so, sorry, I skipped on. So first of all, I've been in the code too much. I need to look up from the code. I need to see the bigger picture. It's one of his first lessons. I need to leave the team to make their own decisions. He took on the feedback that Bobby had given him that he was overriding him too much. So his lesson he's taken from that is, I'm going to leave them to do it for themselves. And I need to give everybody a chance to work on the interesting work. So that kind of goes alongside the previous one. I'm going to give people a chance to work on these areas.
So the API delivery was successful, and he's going to commit to actually trying to give the team a bit more space. And in this phase of the project, the sort of API delivery has been successful. The user base is growing, and it's starting to actually cause a few problems on sort of the content API. So mobile growth is going, tablet growth is continuing to skyrocket, and they're starting to get into new markets. And one of the things about new markets is that there's new traffic on their website. And this is bringing in some performance problems. But this is the challenge that Hayden has for his team about allowing them to sort of look at the sort of performance problem. And he's going to ask them to sort of fix the problem themselves. So rather than sort of take an ownership himself, he's giving them some space to actually do that. Based on the current rate, they're expecting in about 3 weeks' time, this is where performance problem is going to become the critical point. But he's confident his team can actually take care of it. And so he's signed up to go to a conference, and he's decided to leave his team to it and say, you guys, I trust you all, and you're going to solve the performance problem. So he goes away to a conference, and at this conference, he kind of comes across the sort of tech radar. And he hears about different things to sort of try, adopt, assess, and to perhaps put on hold. And there's some interesting things, like you go to a conference, you hear about interesting things. And one of the things he hears about at this conference was the idea about performance testing as a first-class citizen. And he goes, this is completely related to the problem that we have. And he sort of comes back to his team really excited and tells the team, I know that you guys are solving the problem, but we're going to do performance test-driven development. So regardless of what you're doing, we're going to actually write a performance test, we're going to make it fail, and then we're going to drive out all of our code solution through all of this. I know that you guys are using your tools, but I saw this really cool tool called Load Runner, and you're going to use this tool for our performance testing, and this is how we're going to actually do it. There's a lot of chaos in the team, and there's a lot of frustration because they've been looking at this performance problem. And one of the frustrations is that they've already been using JMeter for such a long time, they're really happy with the way that they actually automate tests with it. And they're being asked to learn a new tool called Load Runner, which is proprietary. And they've had troubles adopting this. So some of the team have been trying to look at how they actually use Load Runner effectively. The other team is still actually trying to diagnose what the performance test problem is. And other parts of the team are actually trying to work out what does it mean to do performance test-driven development. Fortunately, one of the developers stumbles across the core issue in this sort of phase and finds out it's a sluggish SQL query, isn't it always? And they managed to actually fix this sort of problem. But in the process, there's been a lot of frustration. So they deploy a fix, and the performance skyrockets, and they're all pretty happy with this sort of phase. So Hayden goes back to his sort of tea room break, and Bobby comes along again and sort of asks him how it's going. And he goes, I'm really proud, the team has been picking up this performance problem, they've solved it themselves. And she has a few other things to perhaps feed back to him. So while he was at the conference, Bobby was talking to Hayden's team, and then also talking to Hayden's team when he got back, and found there was a bit of a discrepancy. And so she has a few things to sort of feed back to him, such as the imposing of a tool, although the team had already picked a tool that they had already chosen, and then sort of coming back and telling people to do a completely different approach, which seemed really out of context for what the team was actually solving. Oh, was kind of Hayden's response.
So let's take a look at what's really going on in the team just now. So not so many happy faces. I'm not sure Hayden's got one at all either at the moment after his chat with Bobby. So everybody's feeling a bit demoralized, like Pat said. They've had their initial choices overridden. The work that they perceived that they'd put in, the joy that they got from actually moving forward with their own solution, basically being wiped out by Hayden's decision to impose his own choices after the effect. The tensions between the QA and the dev, they've kind of got to hostility rates now. It's all getting a little bit touchy. There's an uncomfortable atmosphere across most of the team room. The devs stopped looking on Hacker News, which is kind of a good thing, but unfortunately he's updating his CV, which is a bad thing. So he was taking a lead whilst Hayden was out of the office, so he's just feeling completely done with this. The BA is also utterly stressed because whilst the website had ground to a halt, she was having to deal with marketing, with sales every single day on the doorstep. Why isn't this being done? Why is this happening? So the team is kind of broken down completely at this point. So again, let's pop back out from the narrative and have a look at the anti-patterns that we can see in this section of the story. So the first one, probably not so unknown to most of you, Ivory Tower or Ivory Tower Architect. Now, this is obviously the Hayden story. This is where he comes back from the conference and tells the team to suddenly start doing something completely different. So everybody who stood up when I asked my first question, just saying, take note. So the problem with this is the team gets demoralized. Oh, as I said that already. Sorry, I lost my place a little bit. Oh yeah, so the biggest issue with the Ivory Tower is the fact that it doesn't have the context in order to be able to make the decisions. So when Hayden had stepped out from the team for that period of time, perhaps the solution that may have worked when he left the team is no longer the solution when you come back. So it's not enough to just have known the team in the first place. You also have to keep on checking with the team, making sure that the thing is going to work. Now, in Hayden's particular example, what he missed was A, the progress that had been made with the existing tools, but he'd also failed to appreciate the investment that people had put in, which is why the team broke down so badly. The next anti-pattern we're going to look at, and in fact the last anti-pattern we're going to look at, is that of the outsider. So the outsider is where Hayden had come back, he dropped his performance test-driven development bombshell onto the team, and then he disappeared. And you're leaving a team without guidance, you're separate from the team, you don't have any hands in the code, any skin in the game really, and the team is basically left without leadership yet again. So this is, I think, out of all the patterns, is probably the one that for me is the biggest danger to code quality and to architectural integrity, because at this point the team are making their own decisions, they don't have any guidance, there's not necessarily anybody to pull the individual decisions together to help actually create a cohesive whole. A tech lead can't really understand the problems that are happening in the team or the drivers that are driving the team unless they're actually part of the team. Okay.
So let's go back from the Antipatterns back into the story and see what's actually going on. So Hayden works out that in his sort of first phase, he was maybe 2 heads down on the code, and he was taking care of everything, making all the decisions. In the sort of second phase, he kind of sort of had a very outsider approach, and he decided to have decisions, but not necessarily in the right context for the team. And he tried to give the team some space, but he maybe stepped a little bit too far away from that. And so with Bobby's feedback, he worked out that he needed to do things differently again.
Okay, so now we're getting into the good stuff. I need to be there for the I need to get to know the team. Now Hayden decides on the basis of this feedback that he needs to actually understand the team better and also just to be with them more. And there's various ways that you can do that. So one of them is actually just to be available. So you can't be disappearing off all the time, you actually have to be there. Another thing is, if somebody comes to you with a question, it's important to make space in what you're currently doing to actually answer that question, rather than, again, this comes back to the individual contribution, rather than necessarily going, wait a minute, what I'm doing is too important, you'll need to come back tomorrow or next week or something like that. One-to-ones are another good way of getting to know the team. But probably the single most effective way to get to know the team is actually to get in there and be writing code with them, pairing with them every day. The next lesson that Hayden's going to take back to the team, back to his team, is that around encouraging debate, encouraging technical debate. Now this is one of my own personal favourites, because technical debate in a team, it encourages innovation, it's an opportunity for everybody to share their knowledge, but it also really engages the team in the decisions that they make to take their product forward. Sort of 3 rules to debating as a tech lead that I would hold to. The first one is ask questions and really listen to the answers. Hold back on presenting your own opinion until you've ensured that everybody else has an opportunity to speak. Because as tech leads, you can sometimes come with a sort of innate authority which may prevent other people saying something that is contradictory to what they wanted to say, but maybe what they wanted to say was important. And finally, don't go into a debate with your opinions fixed. You go into a debate prepared to change your mind. And the last lesson that Hayden's going to take forward now is that on sharing knowledge. So I already mentioned you can share knowledge during technical debate. You can also share knowledge on a day-to-day basis with pairing, kind of like I mentioned before. But the other way is about journeys. So whenever Hayden's talking about, or a tech lead, is talking about a technical decision that needs to be made, perhaps there is a time where he has to say, hey guys, I appreciate your opinions. However, there is a reason why I'm suggesting this. It's important to take the team on that journey so that they truly understand the reasons why, the rationale behind, and they'll then learn from that as well. So not only will they be bought into the solution, but they'll also be learning from your solution as well. Okay.
So we're going to sort of close off this parable, and one of the things that Hayden has found when he reaches this sort of point of enlightenment is that he's found balance being a tech lead. So he's found a way of still staying in the code but not being too far removed. And he's been helped along the way with getting some feedback from Bobby and understanding what is the team state. And for you here, I challenge you to sort of think about what is the state of your team as well. and what you can take away in terms of getting that feedback around tuning yourself as a tech lead. Am I spending enough time in the code? Am I giving them enough space to make the decisions? And am I sort of still keeping an overriding sort of guidance of where they're going as a sort of group and keeping them all aligned? So we're going to step back from this and have a look at some of the learnings that we have. So we've sort of covered a lot of the different anti-patterns. And do you want to?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes. So what we've covered off is actually some of the anti-patterns that first-time leads are likely, not definitely, but are likely to fall into, albeit with the very best intentions. It's not that people are going out their way to do things in this not quite positive way. So just to quickly recap through that, we've got the mole, who's the head-down coder. We've got the hero, who takes all the interesting work and is putting in all the hours. We've got the dictator, who wants to make all the decisions. The ivory tower, who's making all the decisions, or making some of the decisions, but from a very high vantage point without necessarily seeing the detail of what lies beneath. And finally, the outsider, who leaves the team alone without guidance to muddle on as best they can.
But there are a lot of things that we can say to avoid doing, but maybe what's more interesting for all of you here is also what are the things you can do to focus on being effective as a tech lead. And this is where we're going to talk a little bit more about the patterns. So we're going to introduce a set of things where these are some of the good behaviors that we'd see in tech leads who are being effective for what they're doing. I think what Laura was talking about before was the first one about being a teacher. So one thing about being a tech lead is that you have authority in your sort of role. And one of the things is that we can often innately abuse this authority, unmeaningfully, but one of the things that we want to do as a teacher is actually ask questions and get people thinking about the whys. So we have a lot of experience in our sort of roles, being architects or tech leads, and we have an opportunity to sort of amplify and grow the people on our team so that they're also capable of doing things. We're probably not going to be a tech lead in this team forever, and so one of the sort of responsible things we can do is actually grow all the skills in our team to the same level that we're doing things. It helps us sort of prevent the hero anti-pattern, whereas if we have more than one person who's capable of doing some sort of skill, then it means that we're not dependent on that single sort of person for taking care of that. And as a tech lead, you'll always struggle if you're the person who's taking care of that because you'll want some time to go back into the code. So we can sort of use the tech lead, the teacher pattern to sort of grow skills in the team so that everyone can sort of contribute and that you have a little bit more time to actually work in the code as well. The next pattern is really around sort of coaching. And this is an explicit sort of stance that you'll want to take as a tech lead because part of it is about the growing and understanding the people in your team. So Laura talked about using one-on-ones to get to know your team a little bit better. And in your one-to-one sessions, you can actually focus on sort of coaching skills. So there's a model called GROW, which is around helping people establish sort of goals, working out what the reality of the situation are, finding options of how they might achieve their goals, and then helping work with each person to work out ways, so that's the W of GROW, of how you might actually get to your goal given your current sort of reality and your options. And this is something that as tech leads, we should be sort of sitting down with each person in our team and saying, what is your goal? Some people, maybe want to move in the direction of sort of front-end development and sort of JavaScript. Other people may want to get better at sort of database development and more sort of infrastructure-related things, so Docker and sort of continuous deployment sort of tools. And unless we actually sit down to ask people about what's their situation and what's their goals, we won't ever really get there. And so this is a sort of stance that we can take to sort of help our sort of team, and as a team actually benefit from that as well. So as people are growing, they can also contribute those skills back in to help solve those problems that will come along as the team sort of progresses. The third pattern is really around a bridge. And these are one of the tensions that you'll probably have as a tech lead, which is the connection between the technical world and all the things that pull you away from the technical world, which will be the people side in terms of your team that you're working with, but also the business constraints. So in our sort of parable, there was the demands and sort of marketing. And if you've been in this role, you'll know yourself, you get dragged away into planning meetings and sort of talking about what new initiatives, what new innovations a business would like to have, and therefore what sort of capacity and how do we achieve that from a technical perspective. And this is where, as a sort of tech lead, we're trying to balance out these things. And one of the great ways of achieving this sort of bridge pattern is really trying to involve other people in these tasks so that you can also not necessarily depend on yourself. So one of my favorite sort of practices to use as part of this pattern is an idea that comes out of feature-driven development, And it's the idea of feature leads. So you have people that are sort of dedicated to focus on one area, and you work with them so that they have ownership of that sort of area, and they may need a little bit of assistance. And so this is where you're starting to delegate some of those things, but you're acting between them and the business conduit, and you can sort of work as this bridge to also bridge not necessarily just the business problems, but also what things people are interested in developing and giving them those opportunities. So this is a really powerful sort of pattern that I think tech leads should take. I think the other side of this is the flip side. So a bridge isn't necessarily the one-way street from business into the technical team, but actually it's the other way around as well. So it's a two-way bridge. So we want to make sure that our team has enough time so that they have time to learn. So if we don't sort of champion for time to either spend learning or innovating or playing around with new tools that we might use, where do we find that time? Who is going to champion for that? And this is where us as tech leads can use this bridge pattern to also talk about what are the benefits of if we spend time learning, how we might use that in our new products going forward. So this is our two-way bridge. The next pattern is really about vision. And unlike sort of the ivory tower architect who's dictating from above, I like to think of the champion of being within the team, but leading the way forward. And I think this pattern is really about helping people in your team understand what's the direction in which we're heading in? What's the key problem that we're working as a group to actually achieve? And not necessarily dictating the solution, but really clearly articulating what is the vision that we're trying to actually deliver. In this progress, you'll have lots of people who have different opinions about what that is. And one of the skills that you need to have playing this pattern is really about that resolving conflict within the team. So where do we spend the time? What solutions do we end up picking and we sort of commit to once we've sort of asked people about what things that they would like to actually try? And I guess also making sure that the goal is a noble goal. So it's not just that we're achieving something because we want to play around with it for a technology's sake, but we're trying to align the interests from the business side, what works for the team, and what we're responsibly able to deliver from a technical solution. And so this pattern is a really powerful pattern for making sure that your team has that consistent way of sort of moving forward. The final pattern, the sort of fifth pattern is around being a team member. And this is kind of the corollary to the outsider. So one of the things about being a tech lead is sometimes you have to do the dirty work. And in this case, it's actually a really powerful thing because your team will respect you a lot more for it. If you start to take all the interesting, challenging problems, like Hayden did in some of this story, you'll find that the rest of your team will get demotivated. They'll sort of say, why am I here if I'm not here to solve interesting problems, if you keep taking all the interesting problems? And the other side to it is that as a tech lead, your time will be split in lots of different directions. And if you take all these complex problems, your flow will probably be interrupted a lot more all the time anyway. And so actually by being able to pick up some of the other tasks, you get a good sense of what the code base is, how easy some of that stuff is, where there are opportunities to maybe automate or make things better. And that makes everyone on the team's life a little bit better. And I think this is really about that rapport thing. So I think if you can't really lead a team unless if you don't have that respect from the team. And I think if you could demonstrate your commitment to the team by doing the same things that they do, you become a lot more respected from the team, and that wins you a lot of sort of brownie points. And the final pattern that we want to talk about is not really a pattern that Hayden was playing, but it was actually the pattern that Bobby was playing. And this is about that mentor relationship. And it's something that we probably don't really talk enough about in our sort of technical field. And one of the things about you being a tech lead is that it's a bit of a lonely role. It's just you, and then you have the rest of the team. And you'll have concerns about, am I getting the right balance between technical and non-technical times right? Are we spending enough time on improving the code base or working on delivering features as well? And there's a lot of things that it'll be very challenging for you to share with the rest of your team. And this is where you want to actually find a mentor. And so this is where other tech leads in other teams or other experienced people, so like Bobby was in the Architecture Guild, can drop in and actually can bounce ideas off and sort of talk about how do you improve yourself as a tech lead and help you on your journey.
Okay. Okay. So we've talked about various patterns and anti-patterns, and there's many, many more. These are just things that we can start to, behaviours that we can try to look out for, and behaviours that we can try to incorporate to counterbalance those behaviours from the outset. A pattern and anti-pattern can often be at either side of the scale. Like we mentioned before, so you've got the outsider at one side, and you've got the team member at the other. Now, when you're talking about these patterns, it can quite quickly, you can actually go from one side of the scale to the other. So for instance, you can go from being the outside to being a team member, and then potentially you might go to being the mole at the other side of that. So there's a lot when we're looking at these patterns, it's about working out what the balance is between the patterns and anti-patterns in order to help you succeed.
And if you're wondering what happened to sort of people at Copper and Pin, we have a bit of an epilogue for you. So Bobby, who was the sort of architect and who had helped Hayden on his journey, had been with the company for over 8 years, and she decided to end up going and starting her own startup. Hayden, he'd mastered his sort of finding balance as being a tech lead, and he was actually asked to join the architecture guild and sort of step outside of the content API team. But what this kind of meant was that there was a bit of a gap in the content API team for a tech lead. And as a result, we have a new player in the sort of story, Jesse, who steps into the role of Hayden being the tech lead, and Hayden acting as the mentor for Jesse. Thank you.